What if I told you there's a doll, so cursed that every child who touched it vanished without a trace, and one mother, desperate to save her son, found out the horrifying truth. The world outside had fallen into silence. Streets were deserted. Laughter of children had vanished, and the hum of ordinary life was replaced by the muffled dread of a global lockdown. Inside her suburban home, Sarah, a renowned toy designer, spent her days hunched over glowing screens, sketching prototypes for a factory that had long since closed. She worked tirelessly, pushing through exhaustion, for the company expected brilliance even in isolation. But for her 6-year-old son, Ethan, the days had become an endless blur of loneliness. A lively child with an imagination that spilled into every corner of the house, he once had a nanny who indulged his endless stories. Now stranded in her distant hometown, she was gone, leaving Ethan to wander the apartment with only shadows and silence for company. "Mommy, listen to me." Ethan tugged at Sarah's sleeve, his small face pleading. She barely looked up from her laptop, though her heart ached at the desperation in his voice. She pulled him briefly into her lap, kissed his hair, and whispered, "Just a little while longer, sweetheart. Let me finish this last design, then we'll talk all night." But Ethan shook his head. His voice was soft but carried an unusual weight for a child. "If you make me a doll that talks, I won't disturb you anymore. I'll tell her everything instead." The innocence of the request struck Sarah deeply. Her chest tightened with guilt. For a moment she stared at him. Then without a word she rose and disappeared into the storage room. The shelves there held prototypes, strange half-creations that had never reached the store. Her eyes fell on one particular doll, a recent design. It was beautiful at first glance, porcelain skin, fine lace dress, delicately painted lips. Yet its eyes were wrong. The glass was warped, clouded, giving the unsettling impression that it looked through you rather than at you. Sarah had dismissed it as a manufacturing defect. But in the dim light of the storage room, the doll's crooked gaze felt almost alive. She carried it back to Ethan. The boy's face lit up, joy bursting from him like sunlight. "Oh, Mommy, she's perfect. I love her. Now I'll tell her all my stories." He cradled the doll against his chest as though it were already his dearest friend. Sarah laughed softly, though unease crawled at the back of her mind. As Ethan skipped off to his room with the doll, she muttered to herself, "It's just a toy, that's all." Yet that night at dinner she noticed something strange. Ethan devoured his food hungrily, eating not only his own plate but reaching into hers as well. He had never eaten so much before. His cheeks were flushed, his eyes gleamed strangely in the dim light, and the doll sat propped in the chair beside him, its crooked gaze catching every flicker of flame from the candle. Sarah tried to brush off the unease, but deep down she felt the first ripple of something she could not name. Something was shifting in her home. And it had started with that doll. The days that followed seemed to slide into something unreal, like a dream Sarah couldn't quite wake from. At first the changes in Ethan were subtle. He spent hours locked away in his room, whispering to the doll in tones too low for Sarah to make out. Sometimes he would laugh, but the laughter was wrong. It didn't bubble with childish joy anymore. It had a strange cadence, sharp at the edges, as though another voice lingered beneath his own. One evening, Sarah sat at her desk, her eyes burning from staring at the blue glow of her laptop. Then it came again, that laughter, muffled yet piercing, rising from Ethan's room. She froze. Something about it raised every hair on her arms. With trembling steps, she hurried down the hallway. When she pushed the door open, her heart lurched. Ethan was perched on top of the wardrobe, swinging his legs happily. The doll rested in his arms, its head tilted toward him. "Ethan," Sarah cried, rushing forward. "How did you get up there?" "You could have fallen and hurt yourself." He looked down, his face alight with glee. "Don't worry, Mommy, she told me how to climb. She helped me. We wanted to play up here." Sarah's breath caught. "She?" Her rational mind screamed to dismiss it. Ethan had always been imaginative, spinning stories out of nothing, but the way he spoke now was so certain, so sincere, a chill running down her spine. She coaxed him down, clutching him tightly once his feet hit the floor. "You scared me," she whispered, pressing her face into his hair. But Ethan only smiled, as though nothing unusual had happened. From then on, the strangeness deepened. She would find him staring at the mirror, murmuring as if someone inside was speaking back. Other times she swore she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing through the hallway, though when she rushed out, Ethan would be sitting calmly on the floor, the doll propped beside him. At dinner one night, she begged him to eat, but he shook his head firmly. "She told me not to," he said, his voice flat. "If I stop eating, I'll get weaker and weaker, and then I'll die. But that's okay. I'll be like her then. I'll be a doll too." The fork slipped from Sarah's hand and clattered against her plate. Anger, fear, and helplessness all surged at once. She slammed her palm on the table. "Enough, don't ever say that again." But when her eyes met his, her blood ran cold. His pupils had dilated into pools of red as though blood itself swirled within them. His lips curled into a smile that wasn't his own. And then Sarah heard an eerie giggle, rising not from Ethan's throat, but from the doll cradled in his arms. The sound was hideous. A chorus of two voices overlapping, her son's and the doll's blending into a single, mocking tone. "You can't stop us," they said together. The voices seeping into the air like poison. "You can't even touch us." Sarah's hand, raised in instinctive anger, froze midair. No matter how hard she willed it, she couldn't bring it down. It was as though an invisible wall held her back. Her mother's baby was beyond her reach. Panicked, Sarah stumbled backward, fleeing to her bedroom. She locked the door, pressed her back against it, and clutched her chest as her heart thundered. Sweat drenched her skin, and still the faint echoes of laughter clawed at her ears. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for every creak of the house. And in the pit of her stomach, one dreadful certainty grew. The doll had a will of its own, and Ethan was slipping further into its grasp. By the third night, Sarah could no longer deny something was deeply wrong with her son. The whispers, the vacant stares, the strange bursts of hunger followed by eerie refusals to eat. All of it pointed to one truth. Ethan was no longer acting on his own. That evening, she called out gently, "Ethan, dinner's ready." Her voice trembled despite her attempt at calm. "No, Mommy," came the reply from his room, flat and cold. Sarah entered and found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, the doll cradled in his arms. His eyes, once soft and innocent, glowed faintly red in the lamplight. "Why not, sweetheart?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "Because she said I don't need food anymore," he whispered, stroking the doll's hair. His voice was different, lower, darker. "If I don't eat, I'll get weaker and weaker until I die." And then, he smiled, a smile so chilling it broke Sarah's heart. "Then I'll be like her. I'll live forever in her world." The words hit Sarah like a thunderclap. Terror twisted into fury, and before she realized it, her hand flew up to strike him, to snap him out of this madness. But her hand froze in the air. She could not move closer. A cold, invisible barrier seemed to hold her back. She gasped in disbelief, staring at her trembling fingers suspended uselessly in midair. Her son stared back at her with eyes that glowed blood red. The doll in his arms chuckled a hollow, unnatural laugh that echoed off the walls. And then both voices, Ethan's and the doll's, merged, reverberating in unison. "You cannot touch us. You cannot stop us. Leave or you will suffer." Sarah staggered backward, horror pressing down on her chest. She fled to her own bedroom, slamming the door, clutching her temples as the doll's laughter echoed inside her head like a curse. Hours passed before she found the courage to return. When she finally opened Ethan's door, she found him lying peacefully in bed, fast asleep, the doll tucked against his chest as though nothing had happened. Her body trembled, but the resolve hardened inside her. "This ends tonight." Summoning every ounce of courage, Sarah tiptoed into the room. She carefully pried the doll from Ethan's arms, its glassy eyes seeming to mock her as she lifted it. In the garage, under a single dim bulb, she laid the doll on the workbench. Her hands shook as she picked up a hammer. For a long moment she hesitated, its crooked gaze piercing into her soul. But then she brought the hammer down. Once, twice, again and again, until the porcelain cracked, splintering into jagged pieces. Its hollow laughter seemed to ring in her ears even as shards scattered across the floor. Breathless, Sarah gathered the fragments, sealed them into a cardboard box, and shoved it deep into the storage closet, alongside broken toys meant for disposal. She slammed the door shut, whispering, "It's over. You'll never touch him again." Relief washed over her in trembling waves. She returned to Ethan's room, heart racing but hopeful. He was safe now, she told herself. Safe at last. But when she pulled back the blanket on his bed, her scream ripped through the night. Ethan was gone. In his place lay the doll, perfect, whole against crooked eyes gleaming, its porcelain lips twisted into a smile. And in its tiny porcelain arms, like a grotesque mockery of motherhood, it cradled a small doll that looked exactly like Ethan. "You thought you could destroy me?" the doll hissed, its head tilting unnaturally as its eyes rolled in jagged circles. "I am no toy. I am a curse. And now I have found my companion." Sarah's knees buckled as she collapsed to the floor, her cries strangled by the suffocating air. Her child, precious Ethan, was gone, his laughter replaced by the hollow giggle of porcelain lips. Darkness swallowed her as she fainted. Her last words a broken prayer. "Please, not my boy, not Ethan. Sarah woke to the sensation of cool water splashing across her face. Her eyes fluttered open, blurred by panic and tears. For a fleeting, disoriented moment, she braced herself to see porcelain eyes staring back at her. Instead, she saw Ethan. He stood at her bedside, clutching a half-empty jug of water, his small hands trembling. His real hands. His real face. "Mommy," he cried, his voice breaking. "You wouldn't wake up. I got so scared. You were saying strange things in your sleep. I called Nanny and she told me to pour water on your face. Please don't scare me like that again." Sarah bolted upright, pulling him into her arms, sobbing into his hair. Relief crashed through her so hard it hurt. She clung to him desperately, terrified to let go as though he might vanish if she blinked. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, rocking him. "I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. Nothing's ever going to take you from me." Yet even as she comforted him, her mind reeled. Was it a dream? A hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? The doll's shattered remains were still in the storage room, sealed in a box. She had destroyed it, hadn't she? A knot of unease tightened in her chest. Later, when Ethan had wandered off in search of his toy, he returned with a confused frown. "Mommy," he said softly, "I can't find my doll. I've been looking everywhere." Sarah forced a smile, hiding the dread creeping back into her heart. "Maybe it got lost somewhere." "Forget about it, sweetheart. You don't need that doll anymore. You have me." But once Ethan had gone, Sarah slipped into the storage room. She needed proof. Proof that what she had seen was just a nightmare. The box was still there, taped shut. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out, pried it open. Inside lay the broken fragments of porcelain. The doll's cracked face, its glass eyes dull and lifeless. A shaky breath escaped her lips. Relief swelled, fragile but real. She grabbed a matchbox from the shelf, struck a flame, and set the pieces ablaze. Smoke curled upward as porcelain hissed and blackened until the fragments were nothing more than ash. She whispered a prayer of thanks as the last member died. Certain now that she had ended the nightmare, she returned to Ethan's room. Her heart lightened as she peeked inside, expecting to find him curled up with his stuffed animals. But what she saw ripped the air from her lungs. The doll was there, whole perfect, seated neatly on the bed, its head turned slowly toward her, its crooked eyes glimmering with cruel delight. And Ethan was gone again. The doll smiled. Its porcelain lips parted, and from deep inside came the voice that had haunted her dreams. "I told you," it whispered, each word dripping like venom. "I am a curse. You cannot destroy me." Sarah's scream tore through the house, raw and ragged. She staggered backward, clutching at the doorframe as her vision spun. She rushed back to the storage room, hoping and praying that she had made some mistake. But when she ripped open the box of ashes, her blood froze. It wasn't the doll she had burned, it was Ethan. Tiny limbs, tiny features, charred and blackened. Her shriek was inhuman, a howl of grief so raw it shook the walls. And from that day forward, the halls of the asylum echoed with her cries, night after night. "I didn't kill him.
I killed the cursed doll."
Not my Ethan, not my baby." But no one believed her. And in the stillness of her empty home, the doll waited, smiling. The night was cloaked in silence, a kind of silence that pressed against the skin and made every sound feel unnatural. The taxi rattled through an empty countryside road, carrying 2 schoolteachers away from the city. Grace sat quietly in the back seat, staring through the window at the pale moon that hung low in the sky. Her fingers clutched at her shawl as a thought gnawed at her. Tonight is the new moon. Mother told me never to travel on nights like this. Beside her, Emily, her colleague and closest friend, was cheerfully chatting with the driver, asking if taxis could easily be found in such a desolate place. The driver laughed, shaking his head. "Not here, madam. This place is far from the city. Once you get down, taxis won't pass again until morning. But give me a call, I'll come for you." Grace said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the mansion rising in the distance, its wrought iron gates gleaming faintly under the moonlight. The structure, Mr. Blackwood's estate, was notorious in the region, not for crime or scandal, but for something far stranger. He was a master puppeteer, famed for his lifelike dolls and talking puppets that dazzled audiences. Yet whispers followed him. Whispers about missing children, about puppets that seemed too real. When the taxi stopped, Grace and Emily stepped onto the gravel path, their shoes crunching softly. Grace's gaze lingered on the ornate carvings of the gate. From afar, they seemed beautiful. But as she stared longer, the patterns twisted in her mind, turning grotesque, almost alive. "Grace," Emily said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go in." Reluctantly, she nodded. The gates creaked open and they walked the stone path flanked by overgrown hedges. Not a single cricket chirped. Not even the wind dared move through the trees. When they reached the grand wooden doors, Emily raised her hand to knock, but before she could, a boy's voice echoed faintly from within. "Come in, teacher. We've been waiting for you." The two women exchanged startled glances. Slowly, the door swung inward. Inside, the mansion was dimly lit, shadows clinging to every corner. At the far end of the sitting room, upon a grand crimson sofa, sat Mr. Blackwood. His eyes gleamed under the glow of the chandelier, and in his hands rested a puppet dressed in a school uniform. "Welcome," he said, his lips curving into a thin smile. He lifted the puppet, speaking in its voice. "We've been waiting for you, teacher." Emily laughed uneasily. "Your collection is incredible, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you for inviting us." Grace's throat was dry. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the shelves lined with dozens of dolls, each dressed in various school uniforms from across the country. The sight twisted her stomach. Mr. Blackwood's smile widened. "Everywhere I go to perform, I bring back a piece of memory. A uniform, a face, a soul. My collection grows." Grace stiffened. "Why does this puppet's face look so familiar?" she asked. He chuckled. "Perhaps because it wears the uniform of your school." A shiver crawled down her spine. She sipped the drink a servant placed in her hands, though every instinct screamed not to. The glass of blue liquid smelled faintly metallic, unnatural. "You see?" Mr. Blackwood continued, running a finger down the puppet's porcelain cheek. "My collection is almost complete. I have many children. But one thing is missing." Emily frowned. "What's missing?" "Their teacher," he said, eyes locking onto Grace's with an unsettling hunger. "Every class needs one." The room seemed to close in around her. Grace's pulse hammered in her ears. The puppets lining the shelves all seemed to turn toward her at once, their glassy eyes reflecting the dim light. And then faintly, she heard it. "Help me. Teacher, please save me." The voice wasn't from the room. It was from the puppet in Mr. Blackwood's hand. Grace's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. Grace's skin prickled as the words echoed through the chamber. "Help me, teacher, please save me." She stared at the puppet in Mr. Blackwood's hand, her pulse hammering. Its glass eyes glistened with moisture like tears. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Emily. "Hear what?" Emily's brow furrowed. "He's just doing a voice, Grace," but Grace wasn't convinced. Her instincts screamed otherwise. Mr. Blackwood rose from his seat with unsettling grace, clutching the puppet as though it were a living child. "Come," he said smoothly. "You must see my collection. It's a privilege I grant to very few." He gestured toward a narrow hallway lined with portraits, each depicting stiff-faced children frozen in eerie realism. Their painted eyes seemed to follow as Grace walked past. She clutched her shawl tighter, every step heavier than the last. At the end of the hall stood a heavy oak door. Blackwood pushed it open, revealing a room colder than ice. The air bit into Grace's skin, her breath visible in pale mist. Yet there were no vents, no machines to explain the unnatural chill. Her eyes adjusted, and what she saw rooted her to the spot. Shelves upon shelves filled the chamber, each holding rows of puppets, boys and girls dressed in uniforms from schools all across the country. Their heads slumped forward, their limbs stiff. Yet the longer she stared, the more she realized something horrifying. These weren't mere puppets. Their faces weren't painted. They were real. Flesh turned waxy and pale, eyes replaced with glass, skin stitched into porcelain shells. And behind each figure, pinned to the wall, was a newspaper clipping missing child reports spanning years. Her knees weakened. "No," she whispered. Emily gasped beside her, clutching Grace's arm. "This is insane, Grace. We need to go," but Grace couldn't move. Her gaze had locked onto one puppet in particular, a boy no older than 10. His features were familiar, hauntingly so. She remembered seeing his face on a flyer tacked to the bulletin board at school. Ravi Thompson, missing. Last seen after the annual festival. "Do you see now?" Mr. Blackwood's voice slithered through the icy air. He caressed one puppet's cheek. "They are not gone. They live here with me. Eternal, obedient, perfect." Grace stumbled back, shaking her head violently. "They're children. You murdered them!" He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "Murdered? No, I saved them. From the chaos of the world, from decay and suffering. I gave them permanence. And soon I will give them their teacher." The puppets' glass eyes seemed to glimmer all at once. Some tilted their heads, and then came the sound-soft, overlapping voices rising from every corner of the chamber. "Teacher, help us, free us." Grace clutched her ears, shaking, her heart tearing apart at the chorus of stolen souls. She turned to Emily, desperate. "We have to leave, now." But when she reached for her friend's hand, it was cold. unnaturally cold. Grace looked and her stomach dropped. Emily was gone. In her place stood a puppet, its porcelain face painted in Emily's likeness, its uniform the same she had worn that evening. Its glassy eyes rolled slowly toward Grace and its lips cracked into a painted smile. Grace staggered back, her scream trapped in her throat. Behind her, Mr. Blackwood chuckled, his voice rich with satisfaction. "My collection," he whispered, "is complete." Grace's body went rigid, her throat constricting as she stared at the puppet that wore Emily's face. Every brushstroke, every detail of the porcelain figure was her friend, yet lifeless, hollow, wrong. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her, but the sound of Mr. Blackwood's laugh jolted her upright. It wasn't the laugh of an artist proud of his work. It was the laugh of something monstrous, something ancient reveling in possession and power. "You monster." Grace's voice cracked, echoing through the icy chamber. "You've stolen them. You've stolen their lives." Mr. Blackwood stepped closer, the puppet still dangling from his hand. His eyes gleamed like oil under the dim lights. "No, Miss Grace, I have given them immortality. They do not rot. They do not fade. They are mine forever." Grace stumbled backward into a shelf, sending two puppets tumbling to the floor. Their glass eyes glinted as though alive, their heads turning with stiff cracks toward her. She gasped, her breath catching in her chest. Then came the voices, whispers rising from every puppet, overlapping, weaving into a chorus. "Teacher, help us, free us, free us." Grace pressed her hands against her ears, but the voices weren't outside. They wormed into her head, wrapping around her thoughts, her fear. Mr. Blackwood smirked. "They cry to you because you still have a soul. You still have something to lose. That's why you belong to me." "No," she whispered, trembling. "Not me. Not ever." Summoning every ounce of courage, Grace lunged for the door. But before she reached it, the heavy oak slammed shut with a thunderous bang. The lock twisted itself, trapping her inside. Behind her, Blackwood's voice deepened, resonant and unnatural. "You cannot leave, Miss Grace. My children don't let their teacher abandon them." The puppets began to move. Stiffly at first, then with greater fluidity. Dozens of porcelain heads lifted. Limbs creaked as though strung by invisible wires. They stepped off their shelves in unison, their glass eyes glinting in the cold light. Grace's chest tightened with sheer terror. She grabbed the only weapon within reach of a fallen metal candlestick. Her hands trembled as she raised it, her breath ragged. Blackwood spread his arms like a conductor before an orchestra. "Now, my children, welcome your new teacher." The puppets surged forward. Grace swung the candlestick wildly, shattering the head of the nearest puppet. Glass and porcelain shards exploded across the floor and a shrill scream erupted from nowhere, the cry of a child's soul being released. For a moment, the room seemed to tremble with that sound. Her heart leapt. Destroy the puppets and free them. Fueled by desperate hope, Grace swung again and again, smashing porcelain faces, freeing voices that rose into a mournful, chaotic chorus. Yet there were too many. For every puppet she destroyed, 3 more closed in. Cold hands clawed at her clothes, tugging her backward. "Stop," she screamed. "I'll set you free, I swear. Just let me go." But Blackwood only laughed, his shadow stretching unnaturally across the walls, towering over her like a demon. "You cannot free them, Grace. They are bound to me. And soon you will be too." The candlestick slipped from her bloody hands. The puppets swarmed closer, their whispers now deafening. Her vision blurred as panic clawed at her mind, and then a voice strong and defiant rose above the others. "Believe. Trust. Fight." Grace froze. It was Emily's voice. Not the puppets, but Emily's true voice echoing from beyond. She clenched her fists, her terror hardening into rage. With trembling hands, she reached for the crucifix pendant around her neck, a small gift from her late mother. She pressed it to her lips, whispering a prayer. The room shook. The puppets recoiled, hissing. Blackwood snarled, his eyes glowing with fury. "You dare defy me?" "Yes," Grace whispered, her voice steady now. "And I'll end this tonight." The chamber pulsed with a suffocating energy as Grace clutched the crucifix against her chest. The once whispering puppets hissed and convulsed, some staggering back as if burned by invisible fire. Mr. Blackwood's face twisted, his calm veneer finally cracking into fury. "You think a trinket of faith can defeat me?" he roared, his voice reverberating unnaturally, shaking the shelves. His shadow writhed across the walls like a living beast, stretching grotesque limbs that seemed to crawl toward her. Grace stumbled backward, heart hammering, but her grip on the pendant only tightened. "You don't understand," she said through trembling lips. "This isn't about me. It's about them." And with that, she lunged for the shelves. Her hands grasped the nearest puppet, a girl with hollow eyes, and hurled it into the fire pit glowing in the corner of the chamber. The doll shrieked. The sound wasn't porcelain breaking. It was a human scream, raw and piercing. A swirl of smoke rose, and Grace swore she saw a faint silhouette. The ghost of a child lifted from the flames and vanished. The room shook. The other puppets recoiled, wailing in agony and longing. Grace's chest heaved as she realized the truth. Destroy them in fire, and the souls are freed. Blackwood lunged at her, his movements suddenly less human, more beast. His fingers hooked like claws, his mouth stretching in an inhuman snarl. "Stop!" he bellowed. "They are mine. My children." Grace ducked beneath his lunge, grabbing another puppet and smashing it against the stone floor before tossing the remains into the fire. Another scream tore through the chamber, followed by a flash of light. The puppets shrieked in chorus, some clawing at their own porcelain faces, others stumbling blindly. Their voices rose in a desperate chant. "Free us! Free us! Free us!" Blackwood howled, his shadow form writhing violently as he hurled a heavy table across the room. It shattered inches from Grace, splinters flying. Pain tore across her arm, but she didn't stop. "Emily!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "If you're still here, help me!" For a heartbeat, the chaos froze. From the crowd of puppets, one figure stepped forward. It was Emily's likeness, porcelain face cracked, glass eyes fractured. But behind that broken mask, Grace felt something stir. The puppet raised its porcelain hand and pointed at a massive figure in the corner of the chamber. Grace followed the gesture and saw it. A towering puppet. Older than all the rest, its face carved with grotesque care. Its chest bore strange symbols glowing faintly. Blackwood's gaze snapped toward her, wild with fear. "No," he shrieked, his voice breaking into a bestial roar. "Not that one. Not my masterpiece." Grace knew instantly. This is the heart. Destroy it and all the others will be free. With every ounce of strength left in her battered body, she sprinted across the chamber. Puppets clawed at her legs, porcelain hands slicing her skin, but she kicked and shoved them aside. Blackwood's shadow surged like a tidal wave, reaching to engulf her. At the last second, she seized a broken torch from the wall, its flame still flickering. With a cry that tore her throat raw, she drove the fire into the chest of the towering puppet. For a moment, silence. Then the chamber exploded with screams. Every puppet shrieked in unison, their voices deafening, a storm of anguish and release. Light burst from their porcelain bodies as they shattered one by one, their trapped souls swirling upward in a torrent of radiant smoke. The fire roared higher, consuming the shelves, devouring the collection piece by piece. Blackwood convulsed, his shadow writhing violently, his body torn between man and monster. He clawed at his face, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You've ruined everything!" he bellowed. "They were mine. You cannot undo the curse." Grace stood tall, the crucifix still burning against her chest. "They were never yours. They were always children." The last of the puppets burst into flame. Emily's cracked porcelain face turned toward Grace one final time. For a heartbeat, Grace saw her friend's true spirit smiling, free before it vanished into light. Blackwood let out a final, guttural scream as the fire consumed him. His form twisted, dissolved, and collapsed into ash. His voice lingered a moment longer, echoing in the inferno. "I am a curse that cannot die." And then silence. The chamber collapsed into embers, the curse undone. Grace staggered out into the night, her body broken, her spirit scarred, but her heart burning with one truth. The children were free. The night air struck Grace like a wave of ice as she stumbled out of the burning mansion. Behind her, Mr. Blackwood's estate collapsed in on itself, flames devouring the house that had been a tomb for so many stolen souls. The air was thick with smoke and ash, but through it she thought she heard something else. Children's laughter. Not mocking, not twisted, pure, free. Grace fell to her knees on the gravel path, coughing violently, clutching her crucifix. Tears streamed down her soot-streaked face as she whispered, "They're free, Emily, you're free." Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights soon flooded the desolate road as police cars screeched to a halt. Officers poured out, weapons raised, but froze when they saw the inferno. One man rushed toward Inspector Harris, his coat whipping in the night air. "Grace," he shouted, crouching beside her. "My God, what happened there?" "Where's Blackwood?" Her lips trembled. "Gone. They're all gone. The children and the souls, I set them free." Harris stared at her, searching her eyes. "Do you realize what you're saying?" "Yes," she whispered firmly, her voice carrying a weight it hadn't before. "And you will find proof in the ashes. Bones. DNA. Everything he hid. He can't hurt them anymore." The inspector didn't reply, but the haunted look in her eyes silenced any doubt he might have spoken aloud. Days later, The police investigation confirmed everything. Human remains were found in jars, fragments of uniforms, traces of dozens of children long thought lost. Blackwood's name spread across headlines, his puppet collection exposed for the grotesque horror it was. But the man himself was never found. No body, no trace, only ash, as though he had been swallowed whole by the curse he served. Grace returned to her modest quarters, her days haunted by flickers of memory, porcelain faces cracking, children's cries for freedom, Emily's final smile before dissolving into light. At night she often lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, hearing echoes that might have been nothing more than wind or might have been the faintest whispers of gratitude from beyond. Yet peace never came easily. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Grace passed the mirror in her hallway. She froze. For just an instant her reflection did not move as she did. Its lips curled into a smile while her own mouth remained still. A chill sliced down her spine, and then faintly, from somewhere deep in the shadows of her empty home, she heard it. That voice, "I told you I am a curse. And a curse cannot die." The lights flickered. The air grew cold. Grace gripped her crucifix, her knuckles white, and whispered a prayer. She knew the battle was over, but the war was not. Because some curses linger, some shadows wait, and sometimes the puppets still whisper.